The termination meeting lasted exactly 4 minutes. That's how long it took for Northline fulfillers to sever my contract, erase my key card, and turn my entire future into a flashing, unread error message. It's not a disciplinary action. Nora, the HR rep, a woman with a smile as bright and synthetic as her acrylic nails, had chirped, "It's simply a corporate restructuring. Your position has been deemed redundant." Redundant? I was 24 years old. My redundancy was that I had a spine. The truth, the one that lived in the space between her practiced words, was Trent Mallory. Trent, our immaculate CEO, a man who wore $3,000 suits and smelled like expensive gin. Trent, who'd pulled me aside last Tuesday, put a polished hand on my shoulder, and asked me no, told me to start optimizing the warehouse payroll. These guys, Nora, he'd said, gesturing toward the floor, they clock in, they clock out. Sometimes they're 7 minutes late from break. It all adds up. Let's just clean up the data, round it down to the nearest quarter hour. It's just good business. It was wage theft, plain and simple. I told him the compliance software wouldn't allow it. He told me to find a way. I didn't, so here I was, redundant. Now, my world was Bayfield Heights at 2 a.m. Seen through the greasy window of the Switchyard Cafe, the city was a smear of cold neon and rust. Frost spiderwebbed the glass, blurring the flicker of the hotel sign across the street. The cafe itself was jammed into a wedge of crumbling brick near the Crescent Terminal, and every 20 minutes, the rumble of a departing train vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder that everyone else was going somewhere. I wasn't going anywhere. Rent was due in 3 days. My redundancy package wouldn't cover half of it, so I'd swallowed my pride, dug out my old non-slip shoes, and taken the graveyard shift that nobody else wanted. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new text. Not from a friend, it was from Mallory's executive assistant. "Mr. Mallory trusts you will maintain professional discretion regarding your departure and all internal payroll processes. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." It wasn't a wish. It was a warning. Don't talk about the timesheets. I wiped the message away with the steam from the espresso machine, my hand tight on the portafilter. The bell above the door jingled, bringing in a slice of the freezing night air. I looked up, expecting another trucker or a terminal stray. Instead, I saw the suits. There were 2 of them, and they didn't belong here. They were bulky men squeezed into ill-fitting blazers, Harkline wrist control. I recognized the cheap silver eagle pin on their lapels from the security guys at Northline. They didn't order. They just took a booth in the corner, the one with the cracked vinyl, and stared. They ordered 2 black coffees and let them go cold. One of them raised his phone, pretending to check it, but the camera was pointed right at me. The flash was off, but I saw the tiny red gleam. My stomach twisted. They weren't just firing me, they were watching me. I turned my back, focusing on wiping down the gleaming metal of the espresso machine until my knuckles were white. The bell jingled again. This man was different. The cold seemed to cling to him, but he wore it comfortably, like the dark, expensive-looking wool coat that draped his shoulders. He was tall, with a stillness that felt alien in the jittery, caffeine-fueled environment of the switchyard. He moved without wasted motion, his eyes dark and calm, scanning the room once before landing on me. He didn't look at the menu board. He just approached the counter. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was low, smooth, but with a gravelly texture beneath it, like silk laid over stone. "Coming right up." I turned to grab a cup, grateful for the momentary distraction from the goons in the corner. When I turned back, he had placed a $20 bill on the counter, his left hand. I stopped. "Sir, you're bleeding." It wasn't a small cut. A jagged slice ran from his index knuckle down the back of his hand, deep and dark against his pale skin. Glass. Maybe it looked fresh. He glanced at his hand as if just noticing it. "It's fine." "It's really not." I was already moving. I ducked under the counter and pulled out the gray plastic first aid kit. Stan, my manager, was legally required to keep... "Sit," I ordered. gesturing to the stool at the end of the bar. To my surprise, he did. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves, ripped open an antiseptic wipe, and got to work. The smell of alcohol and antiseptic cut through the aroma of stale coffee. "This is gonna sting," I said. He didn't even flinch as I cleaned the wound. "It already does." "You should probably get stitches for this," I murmured, concentrating. The cut was clean but deep. I saw a tiny glint, and with a pair of tweezers. I carefully pulled out a tiny shard of dark, curved glass. Looked like a car window. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. I don't know why I started talking. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the simmering rage at Mallory, at the goons in the corner, at the whole damn world. But the words just fell out. "It's always the ones in a hurry," I said, my voice tight as I wrapped gauze around his hand. "People just crash through the world, breaking things, and expect someone else to clean it up. They think because they have money, or a nice suit or a fast car, that the rules just bend around them. They think money is the law. They don't care who gets cut in the process." I taped the gauze down, maybe a little firmer than necessary. "There, keep it clean." He flexed his bandaged hand, his dark eyes fixed on my face. He hadn't looked away once. It was an unnerving, heavy gaze, like the bottom of a cold, deep lake. "You seem to know a lot about that." Before I could answer, a new voice slurred beside me. "Hey, Nora Bean, what you doing? Playing doctor." I sighed, my shoulders slumping. Gary, a regular from the terminal bar, perpetually drunk and overly familiar. He reeked of sour beer and desperation. He leaned heavily on the counter, getting far too close. "Give me a smile, sweetie. It's a rough night." He reached out, his grime-caked fingers grabbing my wrist. I tensed, ready to rip my arm away, ready for the inevitable ugly little scene. "Step back." The stranger didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just spoke. The words were quiet, but they cut through the cafe's fluorescent hum like a razor. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Gary froze. His bloodshot eyes swiveled to the man on the stool. He saw the expensive coat, the stillness, the unblinking stare. Whatever drunken courage he'd had, it evaporated. He let go of my wrist, his hand dropping as if burned. "Sorry, man," Gary mumbled, stumbling backward. "No offense." He practically ran to a booth on the far side of the room and buried his face in his hands. I stared at the stranger, rubbing my wrist. The entire cafe seemed to have gone silent. Even the Harkline goons were watching, their smirks gone. The stranger simply turned his gaze back to me, my coffee. I was saved from having to find my voice by the swinging door of the back office. Stan, my manager, emerged. His face pinched. He was a small man who loved small power. "Quinlan? What in the hell is this?" His eyes darted from the stranger's bandaged hand to the bloody napkins and antiseptic wrappers on the counter. "Are you running a triage ward out here? We have health codes. You don't let customers bleed on the counter." "He was cut. Stan," I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of anger. "The glass was still in it." "I don't care if he was missing a limb. It's bad for business. It's disgusting. Clean this up. Now." He pointed a stubby finger at me. "And I'm docking this hour's pay. We're not a clinic." The injustice of it burned in my throat, hot and bitter. I was being fined for helping someone, after being threatened by goons, after being fired for not stealing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the coffee pot at his stupid, smug face. Instead, I just nodded. "Yes, Stan." I swept the medical supplies into the trash, my movements jerky. I could feel the stranger's eyes on me. When I turned to finally get his coffee, he placed another 20 on the counter. "For the hour," he said, standing up. "I can't take that." "You already earned it." He took the paper cup of coffee I poured, his bandaged hand steady. He nodded once, a gesture of finality, and walked out the door, the bell jingling his departure. He left a vacuum in his wake. The goons in the corner went back to their cold coffee, but their posture was stiffer. The rest of the shift was a blur of misery. Stan watched me like a hawk. The goons finally left around 4 a.m., just before my shift ended. At 4:15, I clocked out, my pay docked by $12. I pulled my thin coat tight and stepped out into the biting cold of the Bayfield Heights morning. The street was empty, washed in the gray, pre-dawn light. I pulled out my phone to call a taxi. I didn't want to wait for the bus. "Not so fast, Nora." My blood went cold. The two Harkline goons. They'd been waiting. They stepped out of an alley, blocking my path to the main road. The cheap sedan they'd been using was parked at the curb, engine idling. "Mister, Mallory is a very generous man," the taller one said, smiling. It didn't reach his eyes. "He feels your departure was abrupt. He wants to make sure you're taken care of." The shorter one held out a folded sheaf of papers and a pen. "It's just a standard non-disclosure agreement, a severance. Sign it and you get a nice little check. Confirms your silence on internal matters." "I'm not signing anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The taller one's smile vanished. "This isn't a negotiation. You've been photographing proprietary documents. That's corporate espionage." "I was documenting theft," I shot back. "Wrong word." He took a step closer, invading my space. His breath smelled like stale cigarettes. "It's a misunderstanding, one that will ruin your life if you're not smart. Sign the paper, Nora, or we'll make sure you're not just redundant. We'll make you invisible. No one will hire you. The MIC will be auditing your taxes for the next 10 years. Accidents happen." He grabbed my arm, hard. "Let her go." The voice came from the darkness of the alley by the cafe's service entrance. It was the man from the cafe, the stranger with the bandaged hand. The goons laughed. "Mind your own business, buddy. This is official Harkline risk control business." "I'm making it my business," the stranger said. He stepped out of the shadows. He looked different now. Without the cafe's fluorescent lights, he looked larger, and the stillness around him felt less like calm and more like control. "You've got 10 seconds to get lost," the tall goon sneered, puffing out his chest. The stranger didn't even look at him. He looked past him, toward the main street. And then I saw it. One by one, headlights flicked on, not a taxi, not a bus. 4 black sedans, sleek and silent, pulled up to the curb, forming a perfect, menacing line. They were immaculate. The kind of cars that ferry presidents or shadows. Their engines were so quiet I could only feel the low hum in my bones. The Harkline goons froze, their bravado shattered. The taller one's face went pale, a sickly white in the streetlight. He whispered a name that sounded like a prayer and a curse. "Mr. Vale, sir, we didn't know. We didn't know she was with you." "The stranger, mister." Vale finally looked at them. His winter-cold eyes seemed to absorb all the light on the street. "She's with me tonight," he said, the same quiet, absolute tone that had stopped Gary. "Of course. Yeah, sir, absolutely." The goon who held my arm released me, wiping his sweaty palms on his cheap blazer. "Just a misunderstanding, a corporate matter. We're leaving. We're gone." They didn't walk. They scrambled back to their sedan, fell inside, and sped off, running a red light as they disappeared. Silence descended, a heavy, absolute silence. It was just me and this Cassian Vale, bathed in the high beams of his 4 silent cars. I was shaking, the adrenaline and the cold warring for control of my limbs. I should have been terrified. I'd just traded 2 thugs for what was clearly a high-level criminal, a boss, an organization. He turned to me. The harshness in his eyes softened, just a fraction, as he took in my trembling. "My apologies for their behavior," he said, as if they were rude waiters, not men who had just threatened to ruin my life. Who are you?" My voice was barely a whisper. "My name is Cassian Vale." He gestured, not to me, but to the lead car. The rear door opened soundlessly. "They won't bother you again. Let me take you home." I looked at the open car door, an entrance to a world I knew nothing about. I looked at the empty street where the Harkline goons had been. I was caught between two kinds of danger. But as I looked at Cassian Vale, at his bandaged hand, my own handiwork, and his steady, unblinking eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. It was a strange, cold, impossible feeling. It was safety. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what world I had just tripped into. I only knew I was tired of being pushed. I took a breath, the frosty air burning my lungs, and I walked past him. I got in the car. The car was silent. Not just quiet, but a deep, insulated absence of sound. The only noise was the smooth click of the turn signal and the hiss of the tires on the damp pavement, miles away from the rumble of the terminal. The leather seats were cool and smelled faintly of the same cold air and wool as the man driving. I stared at my reflection in the passenger window. My face was pale, my hair a mess from the cafe's humidity, my eyes wide and dark. I looked like a refugee, which, I supposed, I was. "I live on 8th and Byrne," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "It's just a few blocks from here." Cassian Vale didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the road, his bandaged left hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. "I know where you live, Nora." The way he said it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the early morning. Of course he knew. The man who had 4 black sedans appear out of the fog wasn't the type to be unprepared. "You're running on adrenaline," he said, his voice calm, analytical. "The crash is coming, you need to eat, and we need to talk." "I don't want to talk. I want to go home." "Harkline was waiting for you. Mallory sent them. They won't stop just because I told them to. They'll just wait until I'm gone." He signaled, turning not toward 8th Street, but toward the warehouse district, where the streets were wider and emptier. "I'm not taking you to a restaurant. I'm taking you somewhere safe to have this conversation." He parked in a clean, well-lit alley behind a brick building that looked like a converted firehouse. The sign was discreet, black metal letters spelling out the Hollow Spoon. It was a 24-hour diner, but through the window, I could see it was spotless, empty, and manned by a single older man behind the counter who nodded once at Cassian as we entered. We slid into a booth in the back corner, the vinyl smooth and uncracked. The man brought 2 steaming bowls of soup, a dark, rich broth with vegetables and noodles and 2 cups of black coffee, then disappeared into the kitchen. He hadn't asked for an order. I wrapped my cold hands around the hot ceramic bowl. "Harkline Risk Control doesn't deploy 2-man teams for a simple contract termination," Cassian said, picking up his spoon. He didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like an off-duty professor or an architect, someone whose thoughts were heavy and structured. "They're bottom feeders, but they're expensive bottom feeders. Mallory is scared. What did you find?" I hesitated, spoon hovering over the soup. "Why do you care? This is corporate accounting. It's not your world." "You said it yourself tonight," he replied, his dark eyes meeting mine. The gaze was just as intense as it had been in the cafe. "You were bandaging my hand, but you were talking about Trent Mallory. They think money is the law." "You're right, it is. But they're using the wrong rule book." I took a breath. The soup smelled like ginger and beef, and I was suddenly violently hungry. "It's a shadow ledger," I said, the words tumbling out. "He's stealing from his own employees, warehouse shift workers, forklift operators, packers, the people who get paid by the hour." "How?" "The biometric scanners, the ones they use to clock in and out. Mallory had the software optimized. That's the word he used. When a worker clocks out for the day, the system automatically shaves 7 minutes off the final punch, every single time." Cassian's expression didn't change, but his stillness deepened. 7 minutes. "It doesn't sound like much," I continued, feeling the old, familiar anger rising. "But it's 7 minutes per shift, per person, over 500 employees, over a whole year. It's millions, millions of dollars in unpaid wages. He has the stolen time, the fractional hours, rerouted through a shell company, Blue Rafter LLC. From there, God knows where it goes. I found it because he wanted me to make the numbers match for the quarterly reports, to hide the discrepancy between Blue Rafters payouts and Northline's labor budget. He wanted me to make the theft look like an efficiency. I stopped, realizing my voice had risen. I was gripping my spoon so tightly my knuckles were white. Cashin slowly stirred his coffee. He looked at his bandaged hand, then back at me. "My rules are simpler," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the same weight as it had on the street. "You don't steal from the people who work. You don't steal their time. You don't steal their sweat. What Mallory is doing, that's not business, it's parasitic." He took a sip of his coffee. "A man who eats sweat will eventually swallow thorns." He pushed a small linen napkin across the table. "You're in danger, Nora, not just of being sued. You're a loose end. Mallory can't let you walk around with that information." He offered me, not a job, but a statement of fact. "I can protect you." I looked at him, at the absolute confidence in his face. I'd just escaped one monster, a polished CEO who stole from his workers. This man, Cassian Vale, was something else entirely, something older, darker. I didn't know his rules, only that he had them, and they seemed to be enforced by shadow sedans and absolute silence. "I'm not joining the Mafia, Mr. Vale." The words were out before I could stop them. A flicker of something amusement maybe passed through his eyes. "I'm not offering you a membership. I'm offering you sanctuary. There's a difference." "I can't," I said, shaking my head. I pushed the soup bowl away, my appetite gone. "I can't be indebted to you. I appreciate the rescue. I appreciate the soup. But I just want to go home. Please, I have to figure this out on my own." He studied my face for a long moment, as if measuring my resolve. I expected him to argue, to insist, to command. He didn't. He simply nodded. "As you wish." He paid for the meal in cash, 2 crisp 50s left on the table for a $20 tab, and walked me back to the car. The drive to my apartment on 8th and Byrne was silent. He pulled up to the curb, the building's broken security door and flickering entryway light looking even more pathetic in contrast to his immaculate car. "He won't stop, Nora." "I'll be gone by morning," I lied. He reached into his wool coat and pulled out something, a business card. But it wasn't. It was a piece of heavy, slate-gray cardstock. In the center, embossed in silver, was a stylized hawk, its wings folded as if in a dive. Below it was a single, 10-digit phone number. No name. "For when home isn't safe," he said, pressing it into my hand. I took it. "Thank you." I got out, and his car didn't wait. It just pulled away, disappearing around the corner as silently as it had arrived, leaving me alone on the curb as the sky began to bruise with the first hints of dawn. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I got inside my building, ran up the 3 flights of stairs, and slammed into my apartment. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and just breathed. Safe. I was safe. I was stupid to refuse his help, but I was safe for now. I dumped my purse on the floor and went to the kitchen, my body finally registering the exhaustion of the last 24 hours. I was halfway through a glass of water when I heard it. A sound from the hallway, not footsteps, a faint, metallic scraping. I froze. I listened. The building was old. It always made noise. But this was different. This was precise. Snick. It was the sound of a lockpick sliding into the cylinder of my deadbolt. I stared at the door, my blood turning to ice. I heard a soft click as the tumblers aligned. Then, slowly, with horrifying deliberation, I watched the small metal knob of my deadbolt turn. The chain was still on, but it wouldn't hold. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I moved. My laptop bag. It was by the door. It had everything, the spreadsheets, the screenshots, the proof. I snatched it. My phone, my keys. Thump! A shoulder hit the door. The chain groaned, the metal straining, the wood frames splitting. Thump. I wasn't going to make it to the hall. I ran to the living room, to the window that faced the alley. I yanked it open, the old wood frame screaming in protest. The metal rungs of the fire escape were just below. Crash! The door burst open, The chains snapping, the wood splintering. 2 men, not the Harkline goons from the cafe. These men were different, dressed in dark utility clothes, their faces set. "Hey, stop her!" I didn't look back. I threw my bag onto the landing below and scrambled out the window, my socked feet hitting the freezing, wet metal of the fire escape. I didn't bother with the ladder. I half jumped, half slid down the rungs, my hands burning from the friction. I hit the alley pavement, snatched my bag, and ran. The alley was dark, smelling of dumpsters and rain. I could hear them, their heavy boots clanging on the metal steps above me. "She's in the alley. Get the car." I burst onto the street, sprinting. The sky was a lighter gray now. A car, a dark, nondescript sedan was parked halfway down the block. Its lights were off. As I ran, its engine roared to life, and the headlights flashed on, pinning me. It peeled out, tires screaming, aiming to cut me off at the corner. I ducked into another alley, a narrow space between a laundromat and a bodega. My lungs were on fire. I hit a dead end, a brick wall. I turned. The sedan skidded to a stop, blocking the alley's entrance, its high beams blinding me. The doors opened, behind me. I heard the pounding footsteps of the men from my apartment. I was trapped. My hand flew to my coat pocket, the card, the silver hawk. My fingers were shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I dialed the number. It rang once. "Vale?" His voice was instant, awake and clear. "They're in my apartment," I gasped, pressing myself against the cold, wet brick. "They're here. An alley. 8th and, I don't know, I'm trapped." The men from the car were advancing, shadows against the glare of their own headlights. "Stay still," Cassian said, and the line went dead. "Nowhere to run, little accountant," one of the men said. He took 2 steps into the alley, and then he stopped. He looked up, past me, toward the dead end. I heard it too, a sound so low it was almost a vibration, the deep, silent hum of an electric motor. A set of headlights clicked on, behind me, at the dead end of the alley. One of Cassian's black sedans was there. It hadn't driven in. It had emerged from a roll-up steel gate I hadn't even seen. A private garage entrance. It glided forward, its high beams catching the 2 men from my apartment, trapping them between the 2 sets of lights. The Harkline sedan at the alley entrance tried to reverse. A second Vale car appearing from the main street blocked its exit, tapping its rear bumper with a heavy, definitive thud. A piece of plastic, a poorly attached fake license plate clattered to the asphalt. The door of the car behind me opened. Cassian Vale stepped out. He wasn't wearing his wool coat now. He was in a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked at the men, then at me. He seemed entirely unimpressed. "They were fast," he said to me, his voice calm. I expected better from Mallory. He walked past me, stopping between me and the trapped men. He simply looked at them. They didn't move. They didn't even breathe. He turned back to me, ignoring them completely, and opened the passenger door. "From now on," he said, not a request, "you stay at Shoreline 6. This time I got in. Shoreline 6 wasn't a house. It was a sub-penthouse in an anonymous glass tower overlooking Harbor Point. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, a sprawling space of cool grays, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was staggering, the entire port lit up like a circuit board. 3 people were waiting. A woman with short, dark hair and the sharp, watchful eyes of a bird of prey stepped forward first. "Nix called her," she said. She did a quick, professional check of my arms, my face, my pupils. "She's clear, just panicked." An older man in a cashmere sweater, holding a tablet, was next. "Doctor, Rowan Keats, sit down. Miss Quinlan, you're in shock." He handed me a glass of water. "Drink all of it." The third person, a young woman who looked barely 20, was already at a massive bank of computer monitors. She had Cassian's dark hair and intense eyes. "Mara Vale," she said, not turning around. "They put a tracker in your purse lining, the cheap GSM kind. It's dead now. I'm scrubbing your digital trail, but you're burning that phone. Cassian walked to the window, looking down at the city. Nix, get her settled. Mara, find out where Blue Rafter terminates. Doctor, Keats, make sure she's okay. Nix nodded and led me to a hallway. This room is yours. It's clean. She handed me a thick, soft, gray wool coat, much warmer than my own. Get some sleep. You're safe here. I stopped at the door. Nix, what is this? What is he? Nix gave me a small, tired smile. Cassian is the ecosystem. He doesn't like parasites. She gestured to the sprawling view of the harbor. In this world, Nora, you don't choose sides. Sides change. You just choose the person you're willing to stand next to. She left me alone. I walked to the window in my new room. The view was the same. The lights of Harbor Point glittered below. I was safe. I was also a prisoner in a gilded cage, miles above the street. My new phone, a sleek, anonymous black burner Mara had handed me, vibrated on the nightstand. A new message from Cassian. Tomorrow we have coffee, in the light. I looked out the window. The sun was just beginning to break over the water, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and cold, hard orange. Tomorrow was already here. The coffee wasn't at a cafe. It was at a small, round table in the corner of the safe house's sprawling living room as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished concrete floor. Mara had a fresh pot brewed, dark and strong enough to strip paint, doctor. Keats had left a tray with toast and fruit. There was an illusion of domesticity, a thin, fragile veneer over the reality of our situation. Cassian sat across from me, his bandaged hand resting on the table. He wore the same simple black shirt from the night before, in the clean morning light. I could see the fatigue around his eyes, but his gaze was as steady as ever. Your laptop, he said, getting straight to the point. Mara says the men who broke into your apartment didn't take it. It was in my bag, I replied, my voice hoarse. I took it with me. Is it clean? It's never been connected to the Northline network. I used my own personal device for the sensitive files, air-gapped. It was a precaution I'd taken weeks ago, a gut feeling that something was wrong. He nodded, a small, approving gesture. Mara spun around in her ergonomic chair, pushing a secure, military-grade laptop across the table to me. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. It's a closed system. Plug in your drive and show me what you have. For the next 10 hours, the world shrank to the glowing screen of that laptop, the city outside, the harbor, the danger. It all faded into a peripheral hum. My old life was gone, but the data remained. It was the one thing that was still truly mine. I walked Mara through my digital breadcrumbs, the raw payroll data I had downloaded, cross-referenced with the manipulated reports Mallory had asked me to create, the subcontractor invoices for Blue Rafter LLC, always paid on the last day of the fiscal quarter, the screenshots I had taken on my phone of the back-end software, showing the rounding algorithm in the code. It was a meticulous, damning chain of digital evidence. He's sloppy, Mara muttered, her fingers flying across her own keyboard, a cascade of green text on a black screen. He's using a standard SFTP client to transfer the aggregated data to Blue Rafter's server. No encryption beyond the basic login. They misconfigured the user permissions. I'm not hacking. I'm just walking in through the side door they left open. A progress bar appeared on her screen. A few minutes later, a file popped into existence on my desktop ledger _47.csv. My breath caught. It was everything. Every shaved minute, every stolen dollar, time-stamped and coded. I opened the file in a spreadsheet program, and my world snapped into sharp, unforgiving focus. Rows and rows of numbers, a silent testament to thousands of tiny thefts. I pulled up my own records, the copies of warehouse shift receipts I'd saved. Cross-reference this column, I said, pointing. These are the employee ID numbers. Now, match them with the disbursement codes from this schedule here. We worked in silence. a shared language of data points and financial logic. It was like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle where every piece was a small, personal betrayal. I saw the name of the single mother who worked the night shift to pay for her son's asthma medication. I saw the name of the college kid saving up for tuition. 7 minutes here, 7 minutes there. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. "There," Mara said suddenly, her voice sharp. She highlighted a new set of transactions at the bottom of the ledger. The Blue Rafter account doesn't just sit on the money. It makes regular, high-value transfers to another entity. I leaned in. An anonymous trust, the Cedar Bridge Fund. "Can you follow it?" I asked. "Give me a minute," more furious typing. Then she froze. She leaned back in her chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across her face. "Oh, you son of a bitch!" She pulled up a new window. It was a public record of corporate filings, Mallory Holdings, Trent Mallory's parent company. The Cedar Bridge Fund was making quarterly payments back to Mallory Holdings. "Look at the memo line," I whispered, my finger tracing the text on the screen. "For strategic consulting services." It was a perfect, closed loop of fraud. He was stealing from his employees, washing the money through a shell company and an anonymous fund, and then paying himself with it under the guise of a legitimate business expense. He was using their stolen wages to fund his own lavish lifestyle. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't just about me anymore. The thought of my sister, June, flashed through my mind. She was in her first year at the conservatory on a full music scholarship. She was brilliant and innocent and completely removed from this world. I picked up the burner phone. "Don't use that name," Mara warned, not looking up. "Just in case." I dialed. June picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and full of life. "Hello?" "Hey, it's me," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Listen, this is a weird question, but for the next few weeks, I need you to not answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize. Okay, not even from a local area code. Just let it go to voicemail. It's important." "Nora, is everything okay? You sound strange." "Well, everything's fine." I lied. "Just some work stuff. A messy project. Please, just promise me." "Okay," she said, confused but trusting. "I promise. Love you." "Love you too." I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. The first person I'd ever protected was myself. The second would be my sister. Later that evening, Cashin found me by the window, staring down at the lights of the container port. He stood beside me, not speaking for a long time. The silence wasn't empty, it was patient. "The Vale Syndicate has rules," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that didn't disturb the quiet. "Unwritten, but they are absolute. We don't touch working people. We don't deal in human trafficking. And we don't burn the city we live in." I looked at him, skepticism etched on my face. "You're a criminal." "I am," he agreed, without a trace of apology. "But there's a difference between a predator and a parasite. A predator takes what it needs to survive. A parasite slowly kills its host for a profit. Mallory is a parasite. He's poisoning the ecosystem." I wanted to dismiss it as self-serving justification, but the way he said it, the simple, factual finality of it, gave me pause. He was drawing a line in the sand, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe. He wasn't a good man, but he lived by a code. Trent Mallory had no code but greed. The next morning, the war went public. Mara flagged an article in the Bayfield Business Chronicle. Northline Fulfillers announced today that they are pursuing legal action against a former contract accountant, Nora Quinlan, for alleged corporate espionage and data theft. At the same time, a registered letter arrived at the Safe House's anonymous P.O. box, forwarded by one of Cassian's people. It was from Harkline's legal team, a cease and desist letter threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Then came the call. A blocked number on my burner phone. Nix answered it, putting it on speaker. "Is this Nora Quinlan? This is Investigator Davies from the Metropolitan Integrity Commission. We've received a report of financial irregularities at Northline Fulfillers, and your name has come up. We'd like you to come in and provide a statement to assist with our inquiry. The MIC, the city's top white-collar crime unit. For a dizzying second, I felt a surge of relief. The good guys were here. Cashin walked over and ended the call. "No," he said flatly. Why they can help? The MIC is a political body, Nora, and Commissioner Thorne plays golf with Trent Mallory every Thursday at the Glass Wharf Country Club. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a pragmatism that chilled me. That wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush. You walk in there, your lawyer gets tied up in motions, and you get held on suspicion of corporate espionage. Mallory's evidence, his narrative, gets out first. We're not playing on his board. The hope drained out of me, replaced by a cold understanding. I was completely, utterly on my own, except for these people. Nick sat down with me later, holding a small, sleek silver bracelet. "This scrambles RFID and short-range location trackers," she said, fastening it around my wrist. "It's not foolproof, but it helps." She then showed me how to sweep my own phone for piggyback apps and tracking software. Paranoia is a survival skill. Learn it. I spent the rest of the day buried in the ledger, my mind racing. Mallory had the law, the media, and the city's investigators on his side. We had the truth, but the truth was useless if we couldn't get it in front of the right people. I kept going back to the file name, ledger_47.csv. It was specific. It wasn't just ledger, CSV or payroll, export, CSV, Y47. I started digging through the Cedar Bridge Fund transfer memos, my eyes scanning the tiny, repetitive lines of text, and then I saw it. A memo code, almost invisible, at the end of a long string of routing numbers on a transfer from Blue Rafter. Raven 47. It wasn't just a number. It was a designation, a project name, a location. "Mara," I called out, my heart starting to pound. "Pull up a schematic of the North Line Fulfillers facility at the Harbor Point Container Terminal." She had it on the main screen in seconds, a sprawling map of warehouses, loading bays, and container yards. "Zoom in on the long-term storage section," I said, my eyes scanning the numbers. Bay C. And there it was, a single isolated structure at the edge of the pier, Warehouse 47. That's where he was hiding the physical records, the hard drives, the original paper timesheets he had to keep for 7 years by law. The source of the crime. I stood up. A decision had crystallized in my mind. I was done reacting. I was done hiding. I was going to end this myself. I walked over to Cassian, who was watching me from across the room. "It's Warehouse 47 inches, I said. "That's where the proof is. I know it." He didn't question me. He simply walked to a discreet steel-paneled wall, pressed his thumb to a hidden sensor, and opened a storage locker. He took out a single, old-fashioned brass key on a simple metal ring. He held it out to me. "This is for the archives room in the safe house," and he said. "It has everything we have on Mallory, Harkline, and their city contacts. Cross-reference it with what you know. Build your case." He closed his hand over mine, the cold metal of the key pressing into my palm. His grip was firm, but not controlling. "You work clean, Nora," he said, his voice low and intense. "You use the data. You use the law where you build an ironclad case." His eyes met mine, and the promise in them was absolute. "I'll handle the mess." I took the key. I walked back to the window, the sea breeze blowing cold through the barely open door to the balcony. I looked down at the city, at the distant lights of the port. A week ago, I was just an accountant, a victim, a loose end. Now, holding this key, I felt a shift in the very fabric of my world. I wasn't just a piece in the game anymore. I was the one holding the thread. The air at Pier Lattice was different. It was thick, heavy with the smells of salt, diesel, and cold, wet metal. Dawn was a weak, gray smear on the horizon, doing little to penetrate the maze of shipping containers that rose around us like steel canyons. Each gust of wind off the harbor was a physical blow, sharp and biting. Nix moved beside me, silent, her feet making no sound on the cracked asphalt. I clutched the strap of my laptop bag, the hard edges of the machine digging into my side. It felt less like a computer and more like a shield. "He shouldn't have let you come," Nix murmured, her breath a white plume in the air. Her eyes, sharp and constantly moving, scanned the rows of containers, the high gantries, the dark spaces between everything. "He didn't let me," I corrected her, my voice tight. "I told him I was coming. I'm not a package to be protected. Nix, I'm the one who knows what to look for." A grudging respect flickered in her eyes. "Fair enough. Warehouse 47 is at the end of this row. It's isolated, only one access road, perfect for a quiet meeting spot or an ambush." We rounded the corner of a massive, rust-streaked container, and there it was. Warehouse 47, a squat, windowless box of corrugated steel. A single security camera was mounted above the main roll-up door, its small red light a malevolent eye in the gloom. It panned slowly, methodically, left and right. "It's active," I whispered. "Mara's looping the feed," Nix said. "To whoever's watching, this pier is empty. We have a 3-minute window from now." We moved. We didn't run. We walked with a purpose that felt louder than a sprint in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder, heavier. My senses were on fire. I could feel the grit of the asphalt through the thin soles of my shoes. I could taste the metallic tang of the air. We were 20 feet from the door when Nix suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me back into the shadow of a container. Her body was tense, coiled like a spring. "What?" I breathed. "Too quiet," she whispered. "No gulls, no wind noise down this corridor. It's a dead zone." And then I saw it. A faint shimmer in the air under the chassis of a flatbed trailer parked nearby. A heat signature. Maybe no. It was a distortion. A reflection. Before I could process it, a man rolled out from under the trailer. He was dressed in black tactical gear, a Harkline patch on his arm. He held a device in his hand, a black rod with 2 metal prongs at the end, a stun gun. From behind a stack of pallets, another emerged, then another from the far side of the warehouse. We were surrounded, trapped. There was no sound, just movement. Nix pushed me behind her, her body a living shield. "Stay down," she hissed. She moved like a blur. The first Harkline goon lunged, and Nix met him, not with force, but with a fluid, brutal efficiency. She deflected his arm, the one with the stun gun, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. The air left him in a whoosh. As he doubled over, she brought her knee up, a sharp, cracking sound echoing in the alley. He crumpled to the ground. The other two converged. One fired his device. A pair of electrified darts shot through the air, trailing thin wires. Nix twisted, the darts zipping past her head and embedding themselves in the steel wall of a container with a shower of sparks. She was good, she was incredible, but she was outnumbered. I had to do something. My eyes darted around, searching. My gaze landed on a red cylinder mounted on the warehouse wall, a fire extinguisher. While the second goon was reloading his stun gun, I scrambled for it. It was heavier than I expected, the cold metal biting into my hands. I fumbled with the pin, my fingers numb and clumsy. The third man saw me. He started toward me, abandoning Nix. I ripped the pin out, aimed the nozzle, and squeezed the handle. A thick, white cloud of CO2 powder erupted from the extinguisher, a roaring hiss that shattered the silence. I swept it back and forth, creating an instant blinding blizzard. The man charging me coughed, stumbling back, his eyes shielded. The diversion gave Nix the opening she needed. She slammed the second man's head into the side of a container, a sickening thud, and he slid to the ground. Through the thinning white cloud, I saw headlights. Not from the main road, they were coming from a service gate at the far end of the pier. A heavy-duty truck, its grille a chrome snarl, roared toward the warehouse. The logo on its side wasn't Northline. It was a snarling silver wolf's head, Argent Kings. "They're not just security," I yelled to Nix over the ringing in my ears. "Mallory hired a moving crew." The truck screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse. The roll-up door grinded open, revealing a team of men inside. Loading file boxes and hard drive towers into the back of the truck, they weren't just guarding the evidence, they were moving it, erasing it. We were too late. The Harkline goons, recovering from the powder, started firing their stun guns wildly. Nix and I ducked behind a stack of steel barrels as sparks flew around us. Then came a new sound, a deep, throaty roar that was nothing like the truck's diesel engine. It was the sound of pure, controlled power. A car, a vintage coupe, long and low, painted a shade of black so deep it seemed to drink the light. It shot through the main pier gate, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist like surgical scalpels. It wasn't one of the anonymous sedans. This was a statement. This was Cassian's Black Mistral. He didn't slow down. He accelerated, driving straight at the Argent King's truck. At the last possible second, he wrenched the wheel. The coupe slid sideways, a perfectly executed drift, coming to a stop broadside, completely blocking the truck's only exit. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The driver's door opened. Cassian stepped out. He moved with that same unnerving calm, as if he were stepping out for a morning coffee. The Argent Kings were professionals. They recovered quickly. The driver gunned the truck's engine, ramming Cassian's coupe. The impact was a brutal shriek of tortured metal, but the smaller car, heavy and solid, held its ground, shoved back only a few feet. "Get in!" Nix yelled, pulling me toward a black sedan that had materialized behind us, one of the escort cars that had followed Cassian. We piled in, me in the back, Nix in the passenger seat. "Go," she barked at the driver. "Mara, are you tracking?" "Always." Mara's voice crackled over the car's comm system. "I've got the truck's plate." The truck reversed, its tires screaming, and found another path, plowing through a chain-link fence and roaring onto the main access road leading out of the port. Our sedan shot after it. "He's heading for the Kingsbridge Viaduct," the driver said, his hand steady on the wheel. "Don't lose him," Nix ordered. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying. "Mara, I need a direct connection to your server. Now, I'm going to try to access their onboard manifest system. If I can get in, I can copy the data before they can wipe it." "Connecting," Mara's voice said in my ear. A secure upload protocol appeared on my screen. The city was a blur of gray concrete and steel outside the window. We raced up the on-ramp to the viaduct, the Argent King's truck a lumbering beast ahead of us. Cassian's Black Mistral was right behind it, a sleek black predator harrying its prey. The bridge was a high, arching spine of steel over the Bayfield River. The morning fog was thick here, reducing visibility. The truck swerved, trying to shake us. I braced myself, my eyes glued to the screen, my fingers typing furiously. Command lines scrolled past. I was in their system. It was weakly encrypted. I initiated the file transfer. A progress bar appeared. 10%, 20%. It was slow, too slow. Cassian's coupe pulled alongside the truck. I could see him at the wheel, his face a mask of concentration. He wasn't trying to shoot out the tires. He was forcing the truck toward the side of the bridge, boxing it in. The truck driver panicked. He swerved hard, clipping the front of Cassian's car. The Mistral spun, but Cassian corrected. His control absolute. The truck, however, lost its line. It jackknifed, the trailer swinging around, and slammed into the bridge's guardrail with a deafening groan of metal. It teetered there, half on, half off the edge. We were blocked. Our driver slammed on the brakes, the sedan fishtailing to a stop just yards from the wreck. The back of the truck burst open. 2 Argent King's goons jumped out, not with guns, but with something else. They lit them and threw them. Flares. They landed on the roadway, erupting in a blinding, chemical red glare. Thick, acrid smoke poured out, engulfing the bridge. It was like a wound had opened in the sky, bleeding light and fire. "Get down!" Nix screamed. An instant later, the passenger window beside her exploded inward, showering the car with a blizzard of tempered glass. Nix cried out, a sharp, ragged sound, and slumped in her seat, clutching her side. I didn't think. I reacted. I shoved the laptop, still uploading, safely onto the floor and scrambled over the seat. "Nix, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she gritted out, but I could see the blood welling up between her fingers. A large shard of glass was embedded in her side, just above her hip. My hands were shaking. My entire body was shaking, but my mind was clear. First aid kit, under the seat, just like in the cafe. "Don't pull it out," I ordered, my voice surprisingly steady. I ripped open sterile pads, pressing them down around the shard to apply pressure. "Just hold this, tight." My eyes were filled with tears, a hot, useless flood of adrenaline and fear, but my hands were a surgeon's. They were my accountant's hands, precise and sure. Through the red smoke, I saw Cassian's car door open. He moved through the crimson haze like a phantom. He wasn't looking at the truck. He was looking up, at the city's ABUS surveillance camera perched on a light pole. He positioned himself, and the two Argent Kings who were advancing on him, in the camera's blind spot, using the smoke and the jackknife truck as a perfect screen. I heard the sounds of a fight, but I couldn't see it clearly. Quick, brutal, and short. I saw one man go down, then the other. Cassian used their own momentum against them. A series of locks and throws. It was violent, but it was controlled. There were no gunshots. He wasn't an executioner. He was a force of order, imposing his own rules on the chaos. He was choosing not to kill when he easily could have. The upload progress bar on my laptop beeped, 100% complete. Cassian appeared at our car door. Pulling it open, he took in the scene in an instant. Nix bleeding, my hands covered in her blood, the shattered window. "Is the data secure?" he asked me, his voice calm. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Good work," he said. Then he turned his attention to Nix. "We're going back." The drive back to Shoreline 6 was a surreal dream. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but we were already gone, melting back into the city's arteries, leaving the chaos behind. I held the pressure pads on Nix's side, my knuckles white. She was pale but conscious, her breathing shallow. I held my laptop on my lap with my other hand, hugging it to my chest. It felt warm. It felt like it had a heartbeat. It was the stolen time of 1,000 people, a silent chorus of injustice. And now, it was safe. Back in the apartment, the rain started, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Doctor, Keats was waiting, taking Nix immediately to a medical room I hadn't known existed. Mara was at her computers, already dissecting the data I'd sent. Cassian stood by the window, watching the storm. I stood a few feet away, my arms wrapped around myself, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its place. The sounds in the room were muted, intimate, the frantic clicking of Mara's keyboard, the soft hiss of the rain against the glass, the ragged sound of my own breathing. It was the sound of a battle won, but a war that was far from over. Doctor. Keats gave Nix a mild sedative after he finished stitching her side. Mara, having secured the data on a dozen redundant encrypted servers, had finally crashed on a sofa in her tech corner, a blanket thrown over her, still surrounded by the faint glow of her monitors. The storm outside had intensified, the rain coming down in hard, driving sheets that made the glass walls of the apartment feel impossibly thin. The city lights were a blurred, impressionistic smear. I had showered, washing Nix's blood from my hands, but I couldn't wash away the feeling. A high-frequency thrum of adrenaline was still vibrating under my skin, making me feel both exhausted and wide awake. I was standing in the kitchen, staring into a mug of tea I didn't remember making, when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The apartment was plunged into an abrupt, profound darkness. The only light was the weak, ambient glow from the stormy sky outside and the tiny, blinking status lights on Mara's servers. The silence was absolute. The sounds of the building's climate control and the hum of electronics suddenly gone. All that was left was the storm, the relentless drumming of rain against the windows. A shiver ran through me, a deep, cellular tremor that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the last of the adrenaline, the final shockwave of the morning's violence, finally working its way out of my system. I felt, more than saw, Cassian move. He was a shadow detaching from the deeper shadows by the window. I heard the soft click of a lighter, and a warm, flickering glow bloomed on the kitchen island. He'd lit a thick, unscented candle that had been sitting in a simple glass holder. Its light cast our shadows, long and distorted, against the walls. He walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He just took the heavy wool coat he'd been wearing, the Black Mistral's namesake, and draped it over my shoulders. The weight of it was immediate, a grounding presence. It was warm from his body heat, and it smelled of the cold night air, expensive wool, and something else, something clean and masculine, that was uniquely him. He was so close that when I drew a breath, I could feel the solid presence of his chest at my back. I could hear the slow, steady beat of his heart, a calm, rhythmic counterpoint to the storm outside and the chaos inside me. "I'm so tired," I whispered to the flickering flame, "of being saved." His voice came from just behind my ear, a low, quiet rumble. "I'm not saving you, Nora. I'm standing with you." The distinction was everything. He wasn't a knight, and I was no damsel. We were two people standing in a storm, and he had simply offered me a better coat. The tremor in my hands eased. I turned to face him, the candlelight carving his face into planes of light and shadow. The intensity in his eyes was still there, but it was softer now, unguarded. My gaze fell to his left hand, the one I had bandaged in the Switchyard Cafe what felt like a lifetime ago. The gauze was still clean, an impulse, a need to connect, to anchor myself to the moment our worlds first collided, rose up in me. Slowly, I reached out. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He watched me, letting me make the choice. My fingers, still cold, brushed against the rough texture of the gauze. I traced the line of the bandage, remembering the feel of his skin, the sight of the wound. It was an invitation I hadn't realized I was extending until he accepted it. He covered my hand with his free one. His palm was warm, his grip firm but gentle. It wasn't a gesture of control. It was an answer, a confirmation. He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the space between us. I could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the way the candlelight danced in the dark pools of his eyes. He was waiting, asking a question without words. I gave him my answer. I tilted my head up, a small, almost imperceptible nod. The kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't born of the morning's frantic violence or the desperate fear. It was slow. It was deep. It was deliberate. His lips were soft, patient, a stark contrast to the hard, disciplined man I knew him to be. It was a kiss that listened, that learned the shape of my mouth, that tasted of coffee in the storm and a quiet, profound relief. It was a promise, a statement of fact in a world built on lies. My hands went from his chest to his shoulders, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, holding on. His hand, the one that had been covering mine, slid from my fingers to the small of my back, holding me steady, drawing me closer until there was no space left between us. A high, piercing whistle suddenly shattered the intimate silence. We both pulled back, startled. For a second, my heart leaped into my throat, thinking it was an alarm. Then I saw it. The old-fashioned metal kettle I'd filled with water on the stove an hour ago, now rocking on the gas burner, a plume of steam erupting from its spout. A slow smile spread across Cassian's face, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed his severe features. He looked younger. He looked happy. A laugh escaped me, a breathless, surprised sound, the absurdity of it. The sheer domesticity of a whistling kettle in the middle of a mafia safe house during a blackout was perfect. He kept his arm around my back as he reached over and turned off the gas flame. The whistle died, leaving us in the quiet again. The steam from the kettle fogged the corner of the kitchen window, blurring the already indistinct city lights into a soft watercolor painting. The warmth from his body seeped through my clothes, a comforting heat that pushed back the last of the lingering chill. He looked down at me, his eyes asking another question. This one was different, softer. I answered by lacing my fingers through his. I led him away from the kitchen, away from the flickering candle, toward the large sofa that faced the wall of windows. We sat, and I curled into his side, my head finding the natural hollow of his shoulder. He adjusted his arm around me, pulling me securely against him until my ear was pressed to his chest again, listening to that slow, steady heartbeat. He didn't speak, didn't need to. I could feel the rhythm of his breathing, slow and deep, and soon my own breathing began to match his. We just sat there, two people on a sofa in the dark, watching the rain lash against the glass, the city a distant, glittering abstraction. He'd made me ginger tea, the warm, spicy scent rising from the mug he pressed into my hands. The taste was sharp and comforting. The feeling of his thumb stroking slowly, rhythmically, over my shoulder blade was more intimate than any kiss. We were wrapped in the scent of rain and ginger, the weight of his coat, the sound of the storm. There were boundaries here, unspoken but crystal clear. This wasn't a prelude. This was the moment itself, a pocket of peace carved out of the chaos. It was skin on skin only through layers of fabric. It was long, searching looks in the candlelight. It was the tightening of his hold when a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the building, a silent reassurance. It was a silent promise, made in the language of shared breath and quiet presence, a promise that when the storm passed, there would be time, a promise of after. Tucked into the safety of his arms, the exhaustion I'd been holding at bay finally washed over me. My eyelids grew heavy. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. For the first time in months, since the day Trent Mallory first asked me to optimize the books, I felt my mind quiet. There were no nightmares waiting for me, no spreadsheets of stolen time scrolling behind my eyes, just the steady rhythm of his heart, a human metronome lulling me into the first real sleep I'd had in an age. I was drifting, caught in that warm, edgeless space between wakefulness and dreams, when I heard his voice, a whisper so quiet it might have been part of the rain. "Tomorrow," he murmured, his lips close to my hair. "Tomorrow I send a box." I woke up on the sofa to the sharp, clean light of a city scoured by the storm. My neck was stiff, and the heavy wool coat, Cassian's coat, had pooled in my lap. The apartment was quiet. Mara was already at her station, nursing a mug of what looked like engine oil. "He's been gone for hours," she said, her voice raspy. "He left this for you." She nudged a fresh cup of coffee and a secure tablet in my direction. "He said you'd want to watch." She patched the tablet into the city's network. The feed was from a traffic camera, high above the financial district, aimed directly at the glass and steel monolith of Mallory Holdings. 9 a.m., Mara murmured, her eyes on her own screen. Showtime. I watched as a nondescript messenger handed a simple, matte black box to the high-security desk in Mallory's lobby. I watched it travel, passed from hand to hand with corporate deference, until it was placed on the vast, empty expanse of Trent Mallory's desk. He looked annoyed by the interruption. He opened it. The camera was too far away to see the details, but I didn't need to. I knew what he was looking at. "A single brass key," I whispered. "On a paper tag," Mara added, reading from a different feed. "It says Locker 47, and there's a note." I watched Mallory read the note. His reaction was everything. The mask of polished, executive charm didn't just crack, it vaporized. He leaped from his chair, a raw, animal panic in his movements. He swept his phone off the desk, his hands shaking. "Locker 47 inches, I said, connecting the dots. Not the warehouse." "A gym locker," Cashin's voice said from the doorway. He walked in, holding a fresh mug of coffee, moving with the preternatural quiet I was coming to expect. At the Bayfield Athletic Club, where he and Commissioner Thorne of the MIC play squash. It's where he kept the physical backups, digital audio recorders from the meetings where he and his team planned the entire optimization strategy, insurance in case one of his subordinates got ambitious. On the screen, Mallory was yelling into his phone. "He's calling Harkline," I said, my heart starting to pound. "He's telling them to clean it out." "He is," Cashin agreed, stopping beside me. He looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "But he's too late." As if on cue, a different set of cars pulled up to the front of Mallory's tower. They were dark. Functional sedans with the official city seal on the side. Men in conservative suits emerged. "The Civic Economic Fairness Board," Cassian said. "They received an anonymous, detailed complaint an hour ago, filed on behalf of the Northline Fulfillers Employee Collective, a complaint that included a very specific, verified data set." My data? The agents entered the lobby, and I watched as Mallory's security team tried to stop them. A warrant was produced. The building was officially being raided. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The feeling was intoxicating. It wasn't just relief, it was leverage. It was the distinct tactile sensation of a very large, very heavy lever finally moving under my control. For the first time, I wasn't running. I was pushing. "The box," I said, looking at Cassian. "It was a diversion, a feint." "It was a stone," he corrected me, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. "In the game of Go, you don't win by capturing everything at once. You place a single stone in a key position, a move that makes a dozen of your opponent's pieces worthless. You don't attack him. You present him with a fact he cannot ignore, and you force him to attack himself. He panics. He makes mistakes. He reveals his hand. You just gave me the facts. Nora, I just gave him the mirror." On screen, Mallory saw the CEFB agents on his internal security feed. He didn't wait. He didn't call his lawyer. He grabbed his overcoat and ran for his private elevator. "He's fleeing," I said, amazed. "Mara?" Cashin asked. "Already tracking his car," she replied. "He's heading for Glass Wharf, to his boat. He thinks he can let his lawyers handle the fire while he waits it out in international waters." Cassian said, "A predictable, cowardly move." Mara switched the feed, tapping into the marina's private security cameras. We watched Mallory's car skid to a stop. He ran, coat flapping, down the polished wooden dock toward a comically large yacht named the Bottom Line. And then he stopped, waiting for him. Sitting perfectly centered on the security pedestal that unlocked his slip was another matte black box, identical to the first. I saw the terror on his face, even from this distance. He looked around wildly, as if expecting an army. There was no one. He crept forward and tore the box open. This time that there was no key, just a single blank USB flash drive. "The first box showed him his past," Cassian said, his voice a quiet rumble. "This one shows him his future. Empty, wiped clean, nothing left to steal." Mallory stumbled back, the empty drive falling from his fingers, the fight, the arrogance, all of it drained out of him. He collapsed onto a dock cleat, his head in his hands, a man completely and utterly broken. At that exact second, my burner phone and Mara's entire workstation lit up with push notifications. The Metropolis Civic Channel had just broken the story. "Northline raided by CEFB. Anonymous data drop implicates CEO Trent Mallory in multi-million-dollar wage theft scheme." "You sent it," I breathed, looking at Mara. "The second the CEFB warrant was executed," she confirmed, a grim smile on her face. "The whole of Ledger 47, every news desk in this city." The game was over. But Cashin's face had gone cold. He was still watching Mallory on the screen. The broken man on the dock was pulling his phone out again. "He's not calling a lawyer," I said, a new dread creeping in. "No," Cassian said. "He's desperate. And a desperate man is no longer a player. He's just a problem." "He's calling the Argent Kings," Mara confirmed, her voice tight. "A secure, encrypted number. The call just bounced 3 times. He's lost his corporate power, Cassian said, turning away from the screen. So he's trying to buy street power. The Argent Kings don't care about his fraud, but for the right price, they'll happily eliminate the root cause of his problem. He looked at me, and the unspoken meaning hung heavy in the air. Me? We moved an hour later. Shoreline 6 was no longer secure. Nix was waiting in the garage, her side bandaged, her face pale but set in a determined scowl. She was driving a beat-up SUV that looked like it belonged to a soccer mom. It was the perfect camouflage. "Where are we going?" I asked, sliding into the back seat with my laptop bag. "Lantern Pier," Cassian said from the passenger seat, "a warehouse on the water. Lower profile, harder to approach." Nix caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A small, pained smile touched her lips. "Well, Nora," she joked, her voice rough. "Warehouse 47 is officially public. Time to start on page 47 of your own life, I guess." The new safe house was the opposite of Shoreline 6. It was all old brick, exposed timber beams, and the faint, comforting smell of creosote and salt. It felt solid, grounded. But I knew I couldn't stay grounded in his world. The data drop was an explosion, but the CEFB would need a witness, a narrative. I couldn't let Cassian Vale's shadow fall over my testimony. That evening, I found him on the flat roof of the warehouse, looking out at the dark, churning water of the harbor. The wind was cold, whipping my hair into my eyes. "I need a lawyer," I said, standing beside him. "I have several." "No," I shook my head, pulling my coat tighter. "Not your lawyers, not anyone from the syndicate. I told you, I have to do this part clean. My testimony can't be compromised by your involvement." I expected him to argue. Instead, he just nodded, accepting the boundary. "Evelyn Reed, my OMD," he said. "She's a civil rights attorney. She specializes in labor law. She owes me nothing, and I owe her nothing. She's immovable. And she fears no one. I'll make the introduction. The rest is up to you." The next 2 days were a blur. I met with Evelyn Reed in a sterile, secure conference room downtown. She was a small, older woman with intelligent, piercing blue eyes and a mind like a steel trap. I laid it all out. The data, the ledgers, the intimidation. She listened, never interrupting, and when I was finished, she simply said, "Let's get to work." We drafted my affidavit, my story, my proof, my name. When I signed it, I felt the last of the victimhood fall away. I was no longer a piece on the board. I was a player. I found Cassian on the roof again that night. The wind was just as cold, but I didn't feel it. "It's done," I said. "The affidavit is filed. Evelyn is submitting it to the CEFB and the Attorney General in the morning." "I know," he said. He hadn't turned, but I knew he was aware of my every movement. I stood beside him, watching the black water. He had respected my line. He had given me the resources to fight my own battle, in my own way. The gratitude I felt was a warm, heavy thing in my chest. It was mixing with the memory of the blackout, of his coat over my shoulders, of his hand in mine. It was respect, but it was warmer than that. He turned his head, his profile sharp against the dim lights of the far shore. His gaze dropped to my mouth, just for a second, but it was long enough to send a jolt through me. The air between us crackled, charged with the same undeniable pull as the tide. This, I realized, was more dangerous than any data theft. He took a step, closing the small distance, his body angling toward mine. Before he could speak, before I could move, his phone vibrated, a short, sharp buzz. Not a call, a text. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. His face, which had been softening, turned to cold, hard granite. "What is it?" I asked, the fragile moment shattering. "It's an alert from the pier's security system," he said, his voice flat and lethal. "Someone just cut the power to the service elevator." A split second later, Nix's voice burst from the comms device on his belt. "Cassian, we have a breach. It's Silas Dorr from the transport team. He's an informant. He just badged Harkline through the ground floor service entrance. They're in the building. They're coming up." There was no time to react. The rooftop, which seconds before had felt like a private sanctuary, became a tactical liability. "Stairs," Cassian snapped. Grabbing my arm, his touch wasn't romantic. It was an anchor in a sudden storm. "Now, Mara, seal the roof access behind us. Nix, what's your position?" "Lobby," her voice crackled, strained. "They came in disguised as building maintenance. Silas let them through the freight entrance. There are at least 4. They're heading for the elevator core." We plunged into the stairwell, the heavy fire door slamming shut behind us with a boom that echoed down the concrete shaft. Cassian didn't take the stairs down. He went up. "They'll expect us to run to the street," he said, his voice a low, controlled current in the dark. We took the steps 2 at a time, our footsteps loud and desperate. "They know our vehicles are in the garage. They'll try to funnel us there." We burst out onto the top floor, a cavernous, unfinished space of exposed ductwork and plastic-sheeted furniture. A single-service elevator stood at the far end. "Silas knows our protocols," Cassian said, his eyes scanning every shadow. "He knows this is the secondary evac point." The elevator doors slid open. They weren't Vale's men. They were Harkline, dressed in gray maintenance coveralls, their faces grim and professional. And behind them, looking pale and triumphant, was Silas Dorr. "Sorry, boss," Silas said, not sounding sorry at all. "Mallory pays better." It happened in a blur of motion. Cassian shoved me behind him, a protective reflex. The Harkline operatives raised their stun guns. I saw the blue-white crackle of electricity. It wasn't about a firefight. It was about capture. A jolt, sharp and electric, hit my shoulder. My muscles seized. My vision flared white, then collapsed into a pinpoint of darkness. The last thing I heard was Cassian's roar of fury, a sound that was ripped away as the world dissolved into a silent, dreamless black. I woke up to the color white. White walls, white ceiling, white floor. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled of antiseptic. I was lying on a narrow cot covered with a thin, white blanket. A single round camera, a black, unblinking eye, was mounted on the ceiling directly above me. I sat up. My head throbbed, and my shoulder ached where the stun gun had hit me. I wasn't tied up. My shoes were gone. I was in a room with no windows and one locked, featureless white door. A flat screen on the wall flickered to life. Trent Mallory's face filled the screen. He was on his yacht, the sun glinting off the water behind him. He was smiling. "Nora, Nora," he said, his voice oozing a smug, paternal disappointment. "Did you really think you could win? Did you think some back-alley thug could protect you from me?" My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs, but my mind, my beautiful, analytical accountant's mind, was cold and clear. Observe, calculate, survive. "You're a cornered animal, Trent," I said, my voice rough. "This is just you lashing out before they put you in a cage." His smile tightened. "Cage-o. No. You see, the CEFB has your affidavit, but they also have a signed confession from you, admitting to corporate espionage in concert with the Vale Syndicate, a known criminal organization. You stole the data as leverage for them. It's a much cleaner narrative." He held up a document, a forgery. My signature, perfectly replicated, was at the bottom. "All you have to do is sign the real one, he said, "and you get to disappear. A new name, a new life, far away from Bayfield. Refuse, and this document becomes public record. You'll be the villain of the story, and you'll spend the next 20 years in a very real, very gray cage. The choice is yours." I let the panic show. I let my breathing become ragged, my eyes wide with manufactured terror. I need to think," I stammered. "I need some water. Please." Mallory chuckled, enjoying the show. "Of course. My associate will be right in." He cut the connection. The door clicked open. A Harkline operative, the same one who had ambushed us, stepped in holding a bottle of water and a plastic cup. He set them on a small metal table beside the cot. The table's surface was polished steel, a perfect mirror. I kept my eyes on the operative, my body language a study in fear and submission, but in the reflection on the table, I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the keypad on the wall outside the door. As he turned to leave, his body blocked the direct line of sight. But I saw his hand move in the reflection. I saw his fingers press the code. 4 digits, 7391. He closed the door, the lock engaged. I waited exactly 1 minute, then I moved. There was a small, red manual fire alarm box on the wall near the door. I took the metal table and slammed its leg against the plastic cover, shattering it. I pulled the lever. No siren, May. Of course not. It was a silent alarm, but it would trigger the building's automated systems. A low hiss started, and a thick, white gas began to pour from vents in the ceiling. A fire suppression system, carbon dioxide. It wouldn't kill me immediately, but it would create chaos. I took the thin blanket from the cot, ran to the sink where the operative had poured my water, and soaked it completely. I wrapped the wet cloth around my face to filter the gas. Then, I dragged the cot and stood on it. Reaching for the camera, I threw the remaining wet portion of the blanket over it, blinding Mallory's eyes in the sky. The hissing stopped. A new sound started, a loud clunk followed by the rush of water. The sprinklers. Not in my room, but in the hallway outside. The system was designed to contain a fire, not just suppress it, it was creating a water barrier. I ran to the door and punched in the code, 7391. The lock clicked open. I peered out. The hallway was a torrent. Water rained down from a dozen sprinkler heads, flooding the floor, creating a disorienting, artificial storm. At the far end, 2 Harkline guards were shouting, trying to figure out what was happening. I didn't go toward them. I looked up. Along the ceiling ran a large, covered maintenance duct. The panel was right above my door. Using the cot as a ladder, I scrambled up, my fingers finding the latches on the panel. It was heavy, but it swung open. I pulled myself up into the darkness, into the cramped, dusty space. The noise of the sprinklers covered the sound of my movement. I crawled, my knees and elbows scraping against the rough metal. I could hear them below me now, shouting, their voices muffled. "She's not in the room, seal the floor." I moved faster, following the ductwork. It was a maze, but they all had to lead somewhere. I saw a grate below me, light filtering through. I kicked it. The metal bent, then broke. I dropped down, landing in a crouch in a deserted office hallway, soaked and shivering. The fire alarm was blaring out here. Real, ear-splitting strobes flashed, turning the water-soaked corridor into a chaotic nightmare of red light and shadow. I ran. I burst through a set of double doors and found myself in a loading bay, and there, skidding to a stop in a spray of water, was a motorcycle. Nix was at the handlebars, her face grim, a spare helmet in her hand. "Took you long enough," she yelled over the alarm. Behind her, blocking the main bay door, was Silas Dorr, a stun gun in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief. 2 more Harkline goons were closing in from the side. Nix gunned the engine, the sound of visceral roar. She didn't attack them. She swerved the bike, using it as a moving wall, cutting off their path to me. "Go, Nora, now." I sprinted toward her, and then, from a side corridor, Cassian appeared. He was moving with a cold, lethal grace, but he was a step too late. He was too far away to help me. He didn't try. He stopped. He locked eyes with me. His look wasn't that of a savior coming to the rescue. It was the look of a partner, an equal. It was a look that said, "I know you can do this. Come on." I didn't wait for him to clear a path. I leaped, throwing myself onto the back of the motorcycle in a clumsy, desperate scramble. I wrapped my arms around Nix's waist just as she twisted the throttle. The bike shot forward, a black missile through the artificial rain. We blew past Silas, so close I could have touched him. Behind us, I heard the sounds of Cassian engaging the other men, but I didn't look back. We roared out of the loading bay and into the rain-slicked city streets. We found Cassian 20 minutes later, waiting for us under a dripping overpass. Silas Dorr was on his knees in front of him, his face bruised. His Harkline backup was gone. Cassian's face was a thundercloud. He looked at Silas with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any overt rage. "You broke the first rule. Silas, you sold your own—" "They paid me," Silas pleaded. "They have my family. Cassian." "Liar," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your sister is in a Vale-funded clinic. Your mother's mortgage is paid by a Vale subsidiary. We took care of you, and you betrayed us for a man who steals minutes from tired mothers." He took a step forward. I knew what was coming. The final, brutal street justice. "No," I said, sliding off the bike. My legs were shaking, but my voice was firm. I walked over to Silas, my eyes locked on his, from a pouch on Nix's bike. I took a heavy-duty zip tie. I pulled Silas's hands behind his back and cinched the plastic tight around his wrists. He flinched, but didn't resist. I leaned down, my face close to his. "You have the right to remain silent," I said, my voice low and steady, "because anything you say will be recorded by the dozen traffic cameras on this overpass. You have the right to a lawyer. If you cannot afford one, I sincerely hope one is not appointed to you. You understand these rights as I have explained them to you." It was the street version, the one I'd learned in the last week. I stood up and faced Cassian. The anger was still blazing in his eyes. "He's mine, Nora." "No, he's not," I said, standing between them. "He's theirs, the workers, the people you and I promised to protect. We can't use Mallory's methods to fight him. We can't operate in the shadows if we want to bring his crimes into the light. We promised them the system would work. We have to let it work. On him, too." He stared at me, his jaw tight. The internal war was visible on his face, the law of his world versus the law of mine. Slowly, deliberately, he unclenched his fists. He gave a sharp nod to one of his men who had appeared from the shadows. "He's exiled," Cassian said, his voice hard as iron. "Cut him off. From everything, every bank account, every contract, every safe house, every friend. Erase his name from our world. He no longer exists. Hand him over to the A-bus. Let them have what's left." As his men dragged a whimpering Silas away, the last of my strength gave out. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape crashed, and a violent tremor took over my body. My knees buckled. Cassian was there in an instant, his arms catching me, pulling me against his chest. He held me, his hand stroking my back in a slow, steady rhythm, like he was physically counting the frantic beats of my heart, willing it to slow down. He didn't say anything, he just held me as the shake subsided, his solid presence a bulwark against the storm inside me. When I could finally breathe again, I leaned back, looking up at him. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced with a fierce, raw admiration. The boundary between us, the line between his world and mine, had blurred. In that moment, looking at him, I understood. There was no more him and me. From now on, there was only us. The Harbor Point Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of manufactured empathy, crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, self-congratulatory hum of Bayfield's elite. On stage, a massive banner proclaimed the purpose of the evening, the Harbor Point Gala for Workforce Assistance. It was a charity event founded and chaired by Trent Mallory to help the city's unemployed get back on their feet. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was hosting a party to celebrate his own philanthropy, funded by the very minutes he'd stolen from the people he was pretending to help. "Smile?" Cashin's voice murmured in my ear. He stood beside me, a ghost in a perfectly tailored black suit that made him blend in and stand out all at once. He looked less like a guest and more like the final arbiter of everyone in the room. "You belong here tonight." I didn't feel like I belonged. The simple, elegant, dark blue dress Nix had procured felt like a costume, but Mara's work had been flawless. The digital invitation on my burner phone, complete with a forged signature from the mayor's office, had passed the security scanner without a flicker of suspicion. We had walked right through the front door. The faces in the crowd were a gallery of masks, polished, smiling, their eyes holding the predatory glint of people who measured the world in profit and loss. They were sharks, and tonight, I was walking into the tank with a bucket of chum. "Drones are in position," Mara's voice whispered through the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece I wore. "They're clinging to the glass atrium roof like spiders. I have 5 different angles on the main stage. The presentation feed is mine. I can override it on your command." I spotted Mallory near the stage, holding court, a champagne flute in his hand. He was laughing, accepting backslaps and handshakes. He looked untouchable, a king in his castle. My stomach churned, a cold knot of fear and fury. Cassian followed my gaze. "He's built his world on an illusion of strength," he said, his voice low. "All you have to do is show them the foundation is sand." He gave my arm a light squeeze, a gesture of solidarity, then melted into the shadows at the edge of the room. He wouldn't be on the stage. His role tonight was different. He was the stage manager for this particular piece of theater, ensuring the lights stayed on and the exits were properly controlled. An hour of tedious speeches and self-congratulation crawled by. Finally, the MC, a local news anchor with a plastic smile, stepped to the podium. "And now," he announced, "it is my great honor to present the Bayfield Civic Heart Award for outstanding volunteer service to our community's most vulnerable." This was it. This year's recipient is a tireless advocate, a true pillar of our city. Mara had found a loophole in the event's programming. The Civic Heart Award was real, but its recipient was a sweet, elderly woman who ran a soup kitchen. Her name was on the physical award, but the teleprompter, the presenter's script, and the on-screen graphics were all now under Mara's control. A woman whose quiet dedication inspires us all. Please join me in welcoming Miss Nora Quinlan. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I saw Mallory frown, turning to an aide to ask who I was. The elderly woman who was supposed to win looked around, bewildered. But the spotlight had found me. The applause was scattered, confused, but it was there. I took a breath. This was the moment, the single stone being placed on the board. I walked toward the stage, my legs feeling both numb and strangely light. Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel their collective judgment, their curiosity. I shook the MC's hand, accepted the heavy glass award, and stepped to the podium. The microphone was live. I looked out at the sea of blank, wealthy faces. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "It's an honor to be recognized, but tonight I'm not here to accept an award for myself. I'm here to talk about the real volunteers, the invisible ones." Behind me, on the massive screen where my name was supposed to be displayed in gold script, a new image flickered to life. Not my name, a file name, ledger_47.csv. The screen filled with rows and rows of numbers, a spreadsheet, raw, ugly, and undeniable. A low murmur started to build in the room. "I want to tell you about one of them," I continued, my voice cutting through the rising noise. "Her name is Maria. She's a single mother of 2. She works the night shift at the Northline Fulfiller's warehouse, packing boxes so that all of you can get your packages delivered on time. She works a 9-hour shift, but she's only paid for 8 hours and 25 minutes. I gestured to the screen behind me. You see, her employer, Mr. Trent Mallory, has a very innovative efficiency program. Every day, his software shaves 35 minutes of invisible time from her paycheck, 35 minutes a day. The murmuring grew louder. I saw the first flashes of cameras from the press table. I saw the discreet figures of CEFB agents, the ones I had met with Evelyn Reed, begin to position themselves near the exits. Mallory was on his feet now, his face a mask of purple rage. "Turn it off," he hissed to his technicians. "Cut the feed." The screen flickered, but the spreadsheet remained. Cassian was at work. 35 minutes, I said, my voice rising with a passion I didn't know I possessed. It doesn't sound like much to the people in this room, but for Maria, That's the 35 minutes she needs to work to afford the medicine for her son's asthma. It's the difference between a full meal and a half-empty pantry. And Mallory has been taking that time, those minutes, from her and 500 other workers, every single day, for 2 years. The room was in an uproar, but Mallory was a fighter. He recovered fast. A man in a sharp suit, his lawyer, leaped onto the stage, grabbing a different microphone. "This is an outrage," the lawyer shouted, pointing at me. "This woman, Nora Quinlan, is a disgruntled former employee and a known associate of organized crime. She is a data thief. This is slander. This is libel. Every person in this room who reports on this will be named in a billion-dollar lawsuit." The accusation hung in the air. A new wave of confusion swept the room. Was I a whistleblower or a criminal? He was using his power, his narrative, to muddy the waters, to turn the truth into just another he said, she said. Suddenly, the grand chandeliers overhead flickered violently. They dimmed, plunging the room into a tense, shadowy twilight before buzzing back to full brightness. Emergency lights along the floor began to glow. "It's the Argent Kings." My earpiece crackled. It was Nyx. Her voice was strained, punctuated by a sharp grunt of effort. "They're in the main utility conduit, trying to cut the power. I'm a little busy." I could picture it perfectly. Nyx in a dark, narrow corridor, engaged in a brutal, silent fight while the high society of Bayfield watched the drama unfold in their evening wear. Cassian's voice came through a second later, calm and cold. "The power is secure. Nyx, the external grid relays are locked. Just keep them contained." I turned back to the crowd, to Mallory's smug, triumphant face. He thought he had me. He thought his lies were as powerful as my truth. "He calls me a thief," I said into the microphone, my voice ringing with clarity. "So let's look at the evidence." I gave Mara the signal. "Page down, Mara, all the way to the bottom." The spreadsheet scrolled, a waterfall of numbers, until it landed on the final page, a summary report. And at the bottom of that report, in a box marked "Approved and authorized by," was a single damning piece of evidence. A crisp, perfect, legally binding digital signature. Trent A. Mallory. The gasp from the crowd was a physical thing, a collective intake of breath. The CEFB agents moved, no longer discreet. They began to converge on the stage. Abuse officers, uniformed and stoic, appeared at every exit, their presence turning the gala into a gilded cage. Mallory's face went white. He knew it was over. He jabbed a finger at his security detail, his cleanup crew, and they began to move, trying to forge a path for him through the panicked crowd. The gala devolved into chaos. People were pushing, shouting, the illusion of civilized society shattering in an instant. I stepped back from the podium, leaving the heavy glass award behind. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs. I had done it. I had pulled back the curtain. I walked off the stage, away from the spotlight, melting back into the shadows where Cassian was waiting. The look in his eyes was not one of victory. It was one of grim understanding. This wasn't the final move. This was just the storm making landfall. The ocean was still rising, and the real flood was yet to come. The victory of the gala was a flash of lightning, illuminating the battlefield for a brilliant, blinding second. The thunder came the next morning. I was in the warehouse kitchen, going over the newly collated witness statements from Northline employees with Evelyn Reed on a secure video call. When Nyx came in, her face was grim. "They took him." My blood ran cold. "Who took him? The Argents." "Worse," she said, her voice tight with fury. "Abyss." 2 detectives and a warrant. They invited Cassian downtown for questioning regarding suspected involvement in organized criminal activity. It was Mallory's move, his last, desperate, predictable move. He couldn't win in the court of public opinion or with the data, so he was trying to change the game entirely. He was using the city's own institutions to remove Cassian from the board, painting me as a pawn of the Veil Syndicate to discredit my testimony. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I gripped the edge of the steel counter to steady myself. For the first time since this began, I was truly alone. Cassian had been my shield, my strategist, my silent partner in the dark. Without him, the shadows seemed to fall a little heavier, the silence in the warehouse a little louder. A cold, insidious question wormed its way into my mind. What am I without him? Was I his partner? Or was I just a project he was managing? Where was the line between his protection and my reliance? I pushed the thought away. It was a poison dart from Mallory, designed to make me doubt, to make me freeze. I would not freeze. Cassian had shown me how to play the game. Now, I had to prove I could play it on my own. "Evelyn," I said, my voice hard and clear, turning back to the screen. "We have a problem. They're trying to sever the head. We need to cut out the heart." I spent the next hour making calls, not as a victim seeking help, but as a general marshaling her forces. My first call was to Raul Ibarra, a fiery, tireless union organizer I'd found through Evelyn's contacts. He had been trying to unionize the Northline warehouse for years, constantly blocked by Mallory's union-busting tactics. "He has Cassian Vale," I told him, cutting straight to the point. "He's trying to frame this as a mob hit, but you and I know this is about the workers." "Damn right it is," Raul's voice boomed over the phone. "What do you need? Quinlan." My second call was to a woman named Lena Ward. She ran an independent investigative podcast called City Static, a local sensation known for its deep dives into corporate and political corruption. "Mister, Mallory's lawyers are stonewalling the press," I said. "They're controlling the narrative. You're the only one they can't control." "They've already sent me 3 cease and desist letters," Lena said, a wry amusement in her voice. "I use them as coasters. What's the real story?" "Nora." The real story was the final piece of the puzzle. Mara had found it in the digital ghost of Mallory's server logs. The data I had released was damning, but it was the copy Mallory kept on site, the real failsafe, the unredacted, unabridged master ledger, was backed up to an offshore server, a digital ghost in a machine somewhere far away. Mallory's allies in the city government will try to bury the evidence. I explained to my new, impromptu team, they'll claim the data was corrupted, that the chain of custody was broken by my theft. We need the original, the pristine, untouchable source code of his crime. Mara pinpointed its physical location, Nimbus Park, a state-of-the-art, high-security data fortress in the city's tech corridor. It was a digital Fort Knox. The plan we hatched was audacious, a 3-pronged attack based not on force, but on misdirection. Phase 1 Lena would go live with a special episode of City Static, releasing the first wave of worker testimonies we had gathered, creating a media firestorm that would put every city official on the defensive. Phase 2. Raul would call a snap wildcat strike. Not a full walkout, but a targeted work slowdown at the port's central traffic hub, snarling logistics and pulling ABUS resources away to deal with the gridlock. Phase 3 was me and Mara. That night, the rain returned, a cold, relentless drizzle that slicked the streets and shrouded the city in a gray mist. Mara, using a forged work order for an emergency server migration, got us temporary access credentials to Nimbus Park. We didn't look like infiltrators. We looked like 2 overworked IT techs on a miserable late-night service call. The data center was a city unto itself, a cold, humming nexus of the modern world. We needed to get to the offshore server aisle, a section that required a secondary biometric scan. But Mara had found a flaw in the building's schematics. An external cable gantry ran along the side of the building, connecting the domestic server wing directly to the international one, bypassing the internal checkpoint. The gantry was a narrow, steel mesh catwalk, 3 stories up, slick with rain. The wind whipped around the corner of the building. Trying to tear me from my handhold, I moved slowly, my knuckles white on the cold, wet railing. Halfway across, my foot slipped. For a heart-stopping second, I was falling. My body lurched sideways, my grip on the railing the only thing between me and the concrete below. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. And then I heard his voice in my head, as clear as if he were standing beside me. Breathe. Nora, keep your breathing steady, like you're holding a chess piece, deciding the next move. I took a breath, then another. I found my footing. I didn't look down. I looked forward. I made the next move. We dropped down through a maintenance hatch into the international server wing. The change was immediate. The air temperature plunged to a steady, humming 15 degrees Celsius, the cold biting at my exposed skin. This was the heart of the machine, a vast, cold room filled with rows upon rows of humming, blinking server racks. There, Mara whispered, pointing. At the end of aisle 9, a single server rack had a small, stenciled label on its side, a designation I knew by heart, Raven 47. This was it, the ghost. I opened the rack. Inside, connected to a fiber optic router, was a single, ruggedized hard drive, Mallory's final secret. I didn't just pull it. I took out a forensic duplication kit from my bag, a device that would create a perfect bit-for-bit clone of the drive without altering the original in any way. As the data copied, a slow, painstaking process, I took out a small marker. On the white magnetic panel of the server rack door, I wrote down the current time, the date, and the SHA-256 hash, a unique digital fingerprint of the copied drive. It was an immutable, public timestamp, a signature that proved the data hadn't been tampered with after this exact moment. The copy finished. I slid the new drive into an anti-static bag and put it in my laptop case. "Let's go," I whispered. We turned and found our exit blocked. 2 Harkline operatives stood at the end of the aisle. They weren't smiling. We were trapped. The aisle was a dead end. Then, from a floor panel just behind them, a figure rose up. It was Nyx. She held a collapsible metal baton in her hand, and there was a look of cold, predatory joy on her face. "The Kingsbridge Viaduct," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the cold room. "When they wrecked my car, they bent the frame just enough to give me a good look at the undercarriage of their truck. I saw the maintenance access panel for their illegal comms relay. It's the same model used in this building's service tunnels. I set a back door for myself, just in case." She didn't wait for them to react. She moved, a whirlwind of controlled violence. Her baton a blur, the fight was short, brutal, and ended with 2 Harkline operatives unconscious on the cold, white floor. "This way," she said, kicking open the floor panel she'd emerged from. "There's a service corridor that links up with the automated delivery bot network. We're taking the mail route out." We crawled through another set of dark, cramped tunnels and emerged in a humming, subterranean corridor where small, wheeled robots zipped back and forth, carrying packages between buildings. We hopped onto a large, flatbed bot, hiding behind a shipment of office supplies as it carried us silently out of the Nimbus Park complex and into the rainy night. I clutched the hard drive to my chest the entire way. It was more than just data. It was the physical manifestation of an idea, the idea that the truth could not be buried, that it could not be deleted. It was the child of my resolve, and I would not let it go. Miles away, in a sterile interrogation room at the ABU's downtown precinct, Cassian sat at a metal table. He hadn't spoken a word in 6 hours. He had refused a lawyer. He just sat, a block of granite, his stillness a weapon they didn't know how to fight. He was watching the clock on the wall, but he wasn't just waiting, he was trusting. He knew I was making my final move. Back at the Lantern Pier safe house, I didn't sleep. I sent 1 encrypted copy of the drive to Evelyn Reed. I sent another, under her legal authority, directly to the lead investigator at the CEFB. Then I made my final call, to Lena Ward at City Static. "Lena," I said, "I'm ready to go on the record, live. I want every person in this city to see the evidence for themselves." I hung up and walked to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same one who had been fired from Northline Fulfillers. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The panic had been forged into purpose. I was no longer the girl who had things happen to her. I was the one who made things happen. I was no longer the reason for the story. I was the one telling it. The storm broke over Harbor Point just after nightfall, a violent, cathartic squall that matched the chaos in my own heart. The location for my live broadcast, for the final move, was Pier 9. It was an old, disused ferry terminal at the edge of the docks, a finger of rotting wood and rusted metal pointing out into the churning black water. It was the perfect stage, isolated, dramatic, and entirely on my terms. I stood alone at the end of the pier, the wind tearing at my coat, the rain plastering my hair to my face. The only light came from a single, swaying lamppost that cast long, dancing shadows, hidden in the rafters of the terminal's awning, a small, weatherproofed drone. Mara's eye in the sky was silently broadcasting everything to the Metropolis Civic Channel. My microphone was a tiny clip on my collar, its signal relayed through the drone. To Mallory, I was just a girl in a storm. To the city, I was the only voice of reason in the thunder. My burner phone rang. It was an untraceable number. Mallory. A little dramatic, don't you think? Nora, his voice crackled, full of static and arrogance. Standing out in the rain, I have the drive you sent a message about, but I want the original, the one you stole from Nimbus Park. You want it. You come get it, I said, my voice steady against the wind. Just you. We end this tonight. Brave words for a girl with no one left to protect her, he sneered and hung up. He didn't know I wasn't alone. I had Raoul's union members creating a traffic incident a mile away, ensuring the only ABUS units who could respond quickly were the ones Evelyn Reed had already vetted. I had Nix, watching from the roof of a nearby warehouse with a high-powered scope, not to intervene, but to be my witness. And I had Cassian. He had been released an hour ago, the case against him evaporating the second the Nimbus Park drive was authenticated by the CEFB. My phone buzzed, a text from Nix. He knows where you are. He's on his way. My heart leaped, but I pushed the feeling down. This was my move. I had to see it through myself. Headlights cut through the rain, a single, dark SUV. Trent Mallory got out, flanked by two large men I recognized as Argent Kings. So much for coming alone. He walked toward me, his expensive shoes splashing in the puddles. He was holding the first black box Cassian had sent him. I have to admit, he said, stopping a few feet away, his voice raised over the storm. I was impressed. For a minute, the gala was a nice piece of theater. He tossed the box. It landed at my feet with a wet thud. But you see, I opened your little gift. I figured out the game. You didn't open anything, Trent, I said, my voice carrying clearly. You only opened the door to your own cage, and you walked right inside. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. My cage, look at you, standing on a broken pier in a hurricane. I still have everything you think these people, these sheep, care about a few minutes. I taught this whole city how to survive. You cut corners. You trim the fat. You take what's yours. That's not theft. That's business. I've been skimming dead time off payrolls for 10 years. It was the confession, the arrogant, boastful, undeniable confession. On the live feed, I knew Lena Ward was splicing his words in real time with the faces of the workers he'd stolen from. It's over, I said quietly. It's over when I say it is, he roared. Taking a step forward, his Argent King's guard moved with him. And then the world erupted in light. Not lightning, the blue and red of police lights, flashing from every direction. Cars screeched to a halt, blocking the pier's entrance. Uniformed ABUS officers and plainclothes CEFB agents swarmed out, weapons drawn, their forms silhouetted against the blinding strobes. Mallory froze, his face a mask of disbelief. The Argent Kings didn't hesitate. They turned and fled, melting into the labyrinth of containers, abandoning their client without a second thought. Mallory looked from the closing net of law enforcement back to me. his face finally, blessedly, empty of all its arrogance. The king was naked in the storm. An agent cuffed him. His movements rough and efficient, the click of the metal loud in a sudden lull in the wind. As they led him past me, soaking wet and utterly defeated, a figure appeared from the shadows behind me. Cassian, he didn't speak, he didn't touch me. He simply stood at my back, his body shielding me from the worst of the wind, a silent, solid presence. He wasn't stealing my victory. He was just making sure I could stand steady in it. Our eyes met, a long, silent conversation across the rain-swept pier. An agent approached me. "Miss Quinlan, we need the drive." I handed her the sealed, evidence-bagged hard drive from Nimbus Park. "The chain of custody is documented on the label," I said, my voice hoarse. I signed the transfer log, my signature firm and clear. As I did, a new sound began to build, a low rumble that grew into a roar. It was the sound of people. A crowd was marching down the service road, held back by a police line. The North Line workers. Raul Ibarra was at their head, and they were chanting, not in anger, but in triumph, chanting the names of their own. Cassian watched the disgraced, handcuffed Mallory being put into a car. "I chose the law of the light," he said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. I turned to him, a small, tired smile on my face, and I chose the man who knows when to stop. The ride back to the safe house was quiet. The rain on the roof of the sedan was a soft, percussive rhythm, like a jazz drummer's brushes on a snare. The war was over. In the warm, dark car, the silence was filled with everything that had been left unsaid. He stopped the car in the warehouse garage and turned off the engine. He didn't move to get out. He just looked at me, his face softened by the dim interior lights. "You can leave, Nora," he said, his voice gentle. "I can arrange it, a new life, anywhere you want, safe. You've earned it." My heart ached at the thought, the easy way out, the escape I had once craved. "Or," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "you can stay." He leaned across the console, his eyes holding mine. He slowly raised his hand, not to my face, but to the side of my neck, his thumb resting on my pulse. He closed his eyes and gently pressed his forehead against mine. It was the most intimate gesture I had ever known. Skin to skin, a silent communion. I could feel his breath, feel the warmth of his skin, feel the world outside, the rain, the city, all of it just fade away until there was only this, only us. In that quiet, sacred space, I made my choice. Later, in a warm, dark room in the warehouse, the city a glittering, rain-washed tapestry outside the window, the heavy wool coat he had first put on my shoulders slid slowly from a chair to the floor. Our fingers intertwined, a perfect, seamless fit. Our breathing was a shared rhythm, a quiet language all its own. His kiss was not a question this time, but an answer. It was a long, slow, deep affirmation of everything we had survived, a promise for everything that was to come. Our eyes never broke contact, a testament to the trust we had built in the storm. It was a silent vow, sealed with a final, lingering embrace that was both an end and a beginning. There was no need for anything more. In the safety of his arms, the screen of my old life finally faded to black. Epilogue. The CEFB's announcement was the top story for a week. Northline Fulfillers was ordered to pay back every stolen minute, with interest and penalties. The city revoked all of Mallory's contracts. Harkline Risk Control was suspended, pending a federal investigation. I didn't go back to accounting. I took the knowledge I had gained, the fire that had been forged in me, and started a small, non-profit consultancy. We called it the Minute Back Collective. We advised workers on their rights, helped them navigate wage disputes, and taught them how to spot the kind of sophisticated theft that had almost ruined so many lives. Its primary anonymous benefactor was a new philanthropic organization called the Clean Wage Fund. 1 month after the storm, a final black box arrived. Inside, there was no threat, No mirror, just a single, beautifully crafted iron key. The note beneath it was in Cassian's clean, spare handwriting. It read, "Only open when you want to call a place home." It was the key to a house on Windfell Hill, a place overlooking the bay, an invitation, not an obligation. I stood on the balcony of that house, the key warm in my hand, and looked out at the city. It was the same view, but I was no longer the girl staring out from a gilded cage. I was a woman who had faced down a storm and chosen her own shore. The sky was clear, a brilliant, hopeful blue. Behind me, I heard the door open. I didn't have to look. I smiled as Cassian's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own, and together, we watched the sun set over the calm, quiet water. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We're curious, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below to let us know, share your thoughts, and connect with other listeners. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting the hype button to help this story reach even more people.